Who wants orchids with blooms that do not last long? How about we turn this around and say, if you're okay with orchids that have a certain charm and may have different structures that keep it interesting while growing such an orchid, even though their blooms are short-lived, then this video is for you. Also, if you want to be forewarned about orchids that do not have long-lasting blooms so that you can avoid them, then this video is for you as well. There's a little side note that I want to share with you, which I found cute. While I was working on the video request from Orchid Ninja Samurai Nina-san for orchids with long-lasting blooms, I was thinking about going through my database to do the opposite. Why not do a video or videos on orchids that have a very short bloom duration? However, I was also wondering if anyone would bring that up in the comments, and well, Joe. Classic case of great minds. Joe expressed the same thoughts, so here we are. To keep this video at a reasonable length, the ticker will repeat the disclaimer, which is important when it comes to my judgment of what I consider orchids with a short bloom duration. My time frame may differ from yours based on the conditions I grow my orchids in. So for me, short-lived blooms, according to my interpretation, is 2 weeks maximum, as in 2 weeks and less. In my opinion, an orchid that blooms for 2.5 weeks to 3.5 weeks, that's pretty standard. I'm also referencing the bloom duration of single blooms because some orchids in this video may have a long bloom duration in general based on how the buds form, the spikes form, when they bloom out. But if you happen to purchase an orchid that has as yet to mature, the extended bloom duration because of multiple scattered blooms over an extended period of time will not take effect until some of the orchids in this episode mature enough to be able to make it happen. We are also going in alphabetical order, not based on the really short-lived blooms to the somewhat short-lived blooms. Anyway, welcome to the patio. Thank you so much for clicking on this video. Thank you for the support. If you would like to double the support, I would appreciate a thumbs up. In order to triple the support, please subscribe to the channel, and well, a super thanks will quadruple the support. The orchids and I appreciate that very, very much. Thank you. Let's start with some ground orchids. I only have experience with Blatia striata. These orchids have a similar growth habit to a classic iris. Tubers develop every season, which produce a new growth for the following season. So this orchid has a clumping and wandering habit. If you can grow this orchid in the ground and don't want it to spread, then I advise to make a sort of barrier to contain the orchid in the area you have designated for it in the landscape. Use a very, very well-draining mix. I have mine in Akadama and a semi-hydroponic setup because this orchid loves water. In some areas, it's going to do very well in a bog-like setting at the edge of a pond, for example. That is how much water it likes. It is slow to get to blooming size if you do not already have a substantial division from an established clump, but it is a reliable bloomer once it matures. My striata and albostriata are in the same pot just for convenience sake. These blew pink and white respectively. However, the blooms are short-lived. A week is a good run for a single bloom. Even though they have a sequential spike, that does not mean the bloom duration is extended. Also, mine do not open up fully. They remain cupped. As I have no other comparison, that may not be the case if you intend to grow them. But I wanted to point that out because it is not exactly as attractive to have cupped blooms like this and then also have them so short-lived. These orchids are winter resters as well. Even if new growths come out while the older leaves are starting to fade, if your temperatures drop down to 5 degrees Celsius or less, as in if you have a winter that causes temperatures to drop radically, the new growths will stall until such a time that the temperatures warm up again to a steady 12 degrees Celsius and higher. They bloom mid-spring and are susceptible to aphids. If those are not dealt with successfully, the buds will blast, or at best, the bloom duration will be reduced even further. Mine gets full sun during the winter months, and right up until the end of spring, they are in full sun as well. After which, I try to protect them from the direct summer sun as best as possible, and if I forget to move the pot, the leaves will burn more than they would anyway due to my low humidity. Humidity higher than 70% will ensure pretty foliage until they naturally start to decline and fall off, starting the growth cycle all over again. The next orchid with short-lived blooms is Bulbophyllum plumatum. Looking at these blooms and being in the know that I have no humidity to speak of, you can see how these fragile blooms would frazzle relatively quickly. They last a week, maybe 9 days, but I prefer to say a week because the tendrils already frazzle within less than a week in my climate. Now, as the orchid matures, it will grow multiple spikes per growth, so that could count as an extension of the bloom duration, but in reality, keep in mind, these blooms, no matter how many spikes grow, they are very tender and will not stick around for long. Even growing it in lava rock with akadama and a semi-hydroponic setup does not provide enough of a high humidity microclimate around the orchid to extend the bloom duration. I have mine in bright shade all the time, and it has to tolerate temperatures down to 14 degrees Celsius, which is not ideal, but the orchid is still here, whereas others have left the collection based on those low temperatures. This orchid would much prefer temperatures no lower than 16 degrees Celsius, and it can take the heat up to 32 degrees Celsius if the humidity stays higher than 70% without fail, or else you will see it stall and grow slower until temperatures balance out again according to its preferences. It blooms early spring, and I have not detected any fragrance, be it pleasant or foul. Catasetum orchid glade Jack of Diamonds. Yes, well, this is an orchid that has me a little disappointed when it comes to the short-lived blooms. Same reason as I just mentioned with the plumatum, because its blooms have delicate thin petals compared to the fleshy sturdy lip. These will look tired within 2 days, while the rest of the bloom still holds its shape and color. I do not get much of a fragrance from this one, maybe a little bit spicy, maybe a little bit sugary, but it's not that evident. So while the blooms look spectacular and this orchid is capable of growing female spikes during the summer, adding to a little more interest when growing it, the showy male blooms really only last a week before everything starts to fade. Ejecting the pollinia will reduce the bloom duration instantly, and this orchid is so sensitive to movement that even a gust of wind will cause the pollen to eject without any intervention. If you are into seeing a Catasetum grow female blooms reliably year in, year out, then this orchid is fun. But other than that, I'm not that impressed with the male blooms, which in my opinion, of course, is actually why we are growing Catasetinae. So mine is exposed to blistering direct sun all summer, then it comes indoors when the temperatures drop below 14 degrees Celsius. It starts to head into dormancy and fall, then the spikes start to grow, and it usually blooms early winter. Now, this orchid may or may not be disputed as per my judgment of short-lived blooms, so at any stage always feel free to add your opinion and your experience into the comments, as well as any other orchids you may be growing with blooms that do not last longer than 2 weeks in the genera of A through D. Don't get me wrong, I love the blooms of my Catleantha Siamese doll kiwi. There is no doubt about it. That is why I'm so disappointed with the short-lived blooms. I find that the freshness of the actual look of the bloom does not extend beyond 4 days. While the bloom will be around for approximately 2 weeks, it starts to get very yellow, making it appear to be fading, even if it's not. Mine grew fine and lekker and self-watering, but if you cannot keep the temperature of this orchid at 20 degrees Celsius during the cooler months of the year and or higher, then the roots are going to object to the evaporative cooling of the lekker. Currently mine is in rescue mode, in lava rock, in a self-watering setup. I'm hoping that she will pull through just because the blooms are that beautiful when fresh. And she usually blooms mid-summer. So let me know in the comments if you grow this orchid and if you agree or disagree with me having included it in this video. I would love to hear from you. Just as a little add-on, being a highlight orchid, give it as much light as you can all year round without burning the leaves. Freckles on the leaves are an indicator that this orchid is getting plenty of light. So moving on to the Dendrobium genus, and while I do not have anything substantial to show you when it comes to Dendrobium anosmum, and that is an understatement, this orchid definitely does not have long-lasting blooms. While spectacular when you have a healthy orchid, with canes growing as long as 80 centimeters, the blooms will only last 2 weeks at best. It is a fantastic orchid to grow when healthy, and the bloom show with the fragrance of fresh, tangy raspberries definitely makes it worthwhile growing this orchid. I have a dud of an anosmum here, make no mistake, but I still live in hope that it will one day grow out of its funk. Mine lives in bright shade while being in this dud stage, but these orchids need full sun during the winter, or if you cannot provide that much light, then you need to provide the highest light you can during its dormancy. The one time I did get to see these two blooms, it bloomed in spring. Early days, when this orchid arrived in my collection, I did have it mounted, but as it was struggling to survive, I changed it into a semi-hydro setup with leca. A healthy anosmum can tolerate temperatures down to 5 degrees Celsius all the way up to 40 degrees Celsius, but it needs a lot of water during the active growing phase, and despite what many opinions state, it should not be denied water during its dormancy. The amount of water should be carefully monitored so as not to rot the roots. This is true. So, I like to say that you need to pretend that you are the dew in order to get an idea how much water is ideal without risking rotting the roots. In the same breath, almost, and with the same care requirements, Dendrobium aphyllum will occupy your care time for 11.5 months, 8 of which will all be about ensuring to accommodate the high watering and fertilizing requirements in order to grow the new growths as long as possible, so that the next bloom season will be as spectacular as possible. All the while, know that your hard work will only result in a bloom duration of 2 weeks, also at best. But you see what a healthy aphyllum looks like compared to the anosmum dud that I have. The anosmum is capable of growing canes longer than my aphyllum, so be prepared to have space ready for these two orchids if you have no other choice but to grow them indoors. If my anosmum were a healthy plant, she would be growing next to this aphyllum, because the conditions for both are ideal right here. Direct sun during the winter as this orchid is facing east, and then as the angle of the sun rises in the sky, it still gets a lot of light in form of bright shade. My aphyllum blooms mid-spring only for 2 weeks, and I have tried to see if the bloom duration can be extended based on a rigorous calcium nitrate supplementing regime during the seasons the canes were growing, but nope. 2 weeks it is. Now, because I have hundreds of blooms, I can detect a fragrance of roses, but it is very mild. So an aphyllum that is not established will not have the backup to be considered fragrant until she reaches a certain stage and blooms this abundantly. So much less showy, but super interesting. Well, if you are into orchids that have a growth structure which is unusual and unique, so to speak, Dendrobium exile is that kind of an orchid. The charm of this orchid, for the most part, because that is what you will see for most of the time, is its unique look. The blooms are tiny and very, very short-lived. 3 days per bloom. Now, this is what I was referring to at the start of this video. Once this orchid is mature enough, it will produce multiple blooms on the canes that are mature enough to bloom, back to back. This gives the impression that the orchid is in bloom for 3 weeks, but it's sporadic and not continuous. Sometimes 2 to 4 blooms will be in bloom at the same time, but sometimes only 1. Maybe not just the interesting structure of this orchid makes it something worthwhile growing, but also the fact that it has 2 flushes of blooms in a single 12-month time frame. The first flush is mid-spring, and then another flush can happen during early to mid-fall. My best bloom flush was in fall of 2023, and that is the footage I'm using here. At the time of filming, this orchid has already bloomed its first bloom, and the next bud is already visible. I have had this orchid since 2018, and only in the last 2 years has it taken off to grow to what you see here. This coming winter, it will be the first time I'm going to test its temperature tolerance out, because according to the books, it can tolerate temperatures as low as 5 degrees Celsius. Past winters, I have brought it inside during the most challenging winter months and was only exposed to temperatures as low as 14 degrees Celsius. So watch this space, stick around, and let's see how she does together. The fragrance is not strong in the air, but if you get really close to the blooms, you will be surprised just how intense the fragrance is up close. You'll be amazed at the beautiful honeysuckle fragrance that these tiny blooms are pushing out. I only expose this orchid to bright shade during the summer, and the angle of the sun then will lower in the sky, exposing it to direct sun starting fall, by which time the temperatures will have dropped and she can take direct sun. So I have another Dendrobium in my database that has a bloom duration of only 10 days, but they are so stunning, so intricate, and they have so much going on, the orchid must be expending a huge amount of energy to even create these blooms. This is Dendrobium Christa Erdmann. No amount of inspiring adjectives can describe the blooms, and it really is such a shame that literally every minute counts during the blooming phase. While it is exciting to see a spike grow from nubbin to full bloom within a matter of almost just a week, the downside is here today and gone tomorrow rings true with the blooms. This orchid comes in during mid-spring. Don't blink, just enjoy. I bring this orchid indoors when my temperatures drop below 10 degrees Celsius. Once again, the low humidity does a number on the leaf tips, so ideally maintain humidity levels above 70%, and with that, leaf tip dieback can be avoided. However, with that high humidity comes the demand for a lot of airflow, or else this orchid will display spotting on the leaves. It's a fine balance to get this orchid to grow blemish-free, she says through clenched teeth. Oh. Now to an orchid that has taught me a few things. This is Dendrobium polyanthum. She smells of licorice, but not the spicy licorice kick. Instead, the sweetened kind. I'm not a fan of consuming licorice, but I have never not liked the fragrance. This orchid also belongs in the deciduous winter resting category, but because of her succulent type structures, she's susceptible to rot. Or what she does is propagate herself by the stems at the base of the orchid drying out and falling off to then grow keikis and start another plant. The first year this happened, I was wondering if I was keeping the base of the orchid too damp, which, given that her structures are so fleshy, it would be an easy thing to have happen. But I noticed it happened on a keiki far away from the base of the orchid, and no water would accumulate there to such a degree for rot to manifest itself. Sure enough, an experiment with propagating canes was successful, and here are the keikis now. While many dendrobiums can be propagated like this, the ease at which this one grew keikis kind of proved my point. This is how she propagates herself, by dropping canes, and they can fall where they may, and she will grow keikis. Living outdoors in bright shade, only in direct sun when all the leaves have fallen off, my orchid stays under the covered portico. I do move her mid-fall into bright shade because by the time the angle of the sun drops, she would be hit with direct sun, which is still too warm for her during fall. Again, interesting, fleshy, succulent type structures. They would burn very, very easily. So without wanting to lose the leaves prematurely, the more strength this orchid can get during the growing phase, the better. She gets moved so as to protect her from direct sun. But again, she can take temperatures down to 5 degrees Celsius and as high as 40 degrees Celsius. However, when the mercury rises to those high temps here in southern Spain, she really needs a lot of water and moisture around her to coat. That is when I have no issues misting her leaves to the drenching point, just to keep as much humidity around her as possible. The bloom duration is 2 weeks, unfortunately, because they are absolutely gorgeous. Same as the Christa Erdmann. There is a lot going on with these blooms, plus the fragrance. 2 weeks isn't too bad, I suppose. I don't know. I wish she would stick around longer. Anyway, she blooms in spring or the beginning of summer, depending on when the date switches over. Right. Who would have thought that I have more orchids with short-lived blooms than I could list off the top of my head? So what I'm going to do is divide this topic into 2 episodes. And when that video airs, I will of course link it in the description below. Remember to feel free to add to this list of orchids with a short bloom duration in the genera starting from A through D. And I hope that you enjoyed seeing what I had to offer. Thank you, Joe, for inspiring me to actually do this. I appreciate the support so much, and thank you so much for watching to the end. Wishing you a wonderful day on the condition, though, please, that you stay safe. Take care. Bye.